And now it's time to focus on security. See, the thing is, when you talk about software development, of course, we build projects. And then in that process, basically, we have to first learn the language, we have to learn the frameworks, and then we start implementing the project. The most important thing in a project when you build it is it should work. Of course, right? If your software is not working, then all the other aspect doesn't make any sense. So the first thing is focus on building a working product. Next is the project or the software should be stable. I mean, we build projects which works and then suddenly it stopped working for a few inputs and then maybe because of some issues, it gives you other issues. Now that means your software is not stable and most of the applications which I use on my phone are not stable, right? Even it can be a banking application. I mean, the only thing which works perfectly, I think, is calculator, right? Apart from that, you will see bugs in most of the softwares. And it will be. No software in the world is 100% bug proof. And if you think that one of the software is bug proof, maybe we have not done enough hard work to find the bugs. But yeah, it will have some bugs. We have to make sure that you reduce the number of bugs, at least the major bugs should not be there. And by doing that, you're making it stable. So in Java also, we can do that with the help of handling the exceptions and stuff. Then the most important thing which comes here is the security. And we know the importance of security, right? And that's why on your phone as well, you implement the locks. Maybe it can be your fingerprint reader or your face unlock or using a pattern or a password. We do keep the password as 000. Just to make it easy, but again, not a good idea. Still, we know the importance of security. Now, whatever we have built till this point and whatever we have learned in the project which we have built is not secure because anyone can go there, anyone can do anything with the project. What if you want to make it secure? You'll be having multiple users. Not everyone should be able to do everything. Example, if you are building e-commerce, we will be having different rules there. So the seller will add the product, the buyer will buy the product, right? So everyone will have a different role and they have to log in to achieve those roles. And that's how you can secure it. And that's not the only way you can secure it. There are multiple ways of securing it. But as a developer, we focus on login, logout with the help of username, password, or maybe some other formats. So yeah, so how do we implement security? Now, if you're not using Spring, if you're using a normal servlet JSP to build web application, implementing security is a big task. I mean, trust me, if you spend 10 hours building a product, you will be spending another 20 hours securing it. But Spring security will make your work easy. How? We'll see that step by step. But then how do we know? How do we secure the application? What are the steps you have to follow? Sometimes we feel that it is secure and then some hacker will hack it by showing, hey, it's not secure. Then you will secure it. It works in the normal applications, but think about banking application. Think about healthcare records. So sometimes we are not sure how do we secure it. We don't want to wait for someone to hack and then tell us that's how I can hack your software or the application. Now to do this, we have something called OWASP. Now, OWASP stands for Open Web Application Security Project. And what they do is every 4 years, they release some important security measures which you can take or some issues. And then you can work on those issues and make sure that you don't have that in your project. And they call it as OWASP Top 10. So if I click on this top 10 here, so you can see these are the top 10 risks of 2021. So they release this in every 4 years. So the next version or next update is expected to be coming into 2025. So depending upon when you're watching this, so you can look at the recent top 10. So this was 2017, this is 2021, and these are the measures, these are the security risk. And you can just go through this. It talks about access control, cryptography, how do you encrypt and how do you decrypt, which standards you're following, are you handling the injection attacks, then designing, is it the way you design your software, is it secure? There are a lot of things which are mentioned here. I would also add a link of OWASP Top 10 in the description. I already made a video on this, so you can have a watch. But make sure that you follow this to understand different security issues which we have. Okay, so the good thing is, if you are not using Spring, then you have to think about all those things. You have to implement them step by step. Now, when you use a framework like Spring, which has its own security implementation, which is called Spring Security, it takes care of most of these things. And it by default will say, hey, you're doing this. Maybe it will not make your web secure. So do this. And it will give you suggestions as well. It will restrict you to do certain things. And if you follow that, you're basically making your application secure. And what I'm talking about, you will get to know that in some time. In the upcoming videos. So now let's try to build a project, and let me show you how easy it is to secure your application using Spring Security. So to do that, what I will do is, first of all, let's create a new project. Of course, I can edit my existing project, but I want to show you how do you start a project thinking security in the mind. Okay, so let's go to our start.spring.io, and here we'll create a Maven project with Java language. This is 3.3.1. The group ID is com.telusko. The artifact ID is Spring Security Example. Of course, you can use any name, doesn't matter. And the packaging will be Java. The Java version is 21. Now, dependencies. Of course, you can secure different type of applications. Example, if you are securing your hardware, let's say I have this phone with me and I want to secure this. Basically, I can just keep it in a room and I can lock the room so that no one can access it. That's external security. But what if someone can hack it online? So for that, we have to build Spring Security. So I'm basically trying to secure a web application using Spring Security. So I want to have a web feature. I will also get DevTool just in case if I want to use that. We can also use database. See, ultimately, when you say login, username, login, password, you may want to store that in database. So of course, we need to have database as well. But maybe we can add database part later. At this point, just try to keep it simple. So we got web and DevTools. I will get now Spring Security. Now this will make your app secure. And I will click on generate. So it will download the project. Now the only thing we have to do is we have to unzip it and open that in the IntelliJ IDEA community version. So unzipping done, I will just open this project now. So this is a project. I will click on open and yeah, I got my project here. So basically I got Spring Security project, and now I want to test it if this is working. So what I will do is, to start with, I will disable the Spring Security part. So at this point, I will just say comment and reload the Maven changes. That's important. Now, once you reload, you don't have Spring Security in the project. So it is normal Spring Boot application. And I will go to SRC. In the main, I will create a controller, because at this point, we don't have any controllers. And if you want to secure, you need some resource to secure, right? So let's create a resource, and I will say this as a simple hello controller, nothing fancy, a simple hello controller. And here, basically what I'm going to do is, of course, I have to make it controller, and I'll make it REST controller. I don't want to create the UIs. I will simply go for the REST endpoints. And here, I just want one method, and we have used this before. So I will simply say greet. And this will basically get mapping, and the URL is homepage. So whenever someone requests for the homepage, I want to return welcome to Telusko. That's it. Nothing fancy, just a simple text. Okay. So for the homepage, this is the text I want to return. I want to check if this is working. So I will go back to my application, and here I will click on run. This should run on port number 8080 if it is free. And it should be free. So if I look at here, yeah, it is running on port number 8080. How do I verify this? I will open a browser. Okay, so I got my browser here, and I'm going to hit localhost 8080, and you can see it says welcome to Telusko. Now this is the resource I want to secure. Of course, this can be a very complex resource as well, something which interacts with the database, or maybe it is doing some bigger task. It doesn't matter, right? Resource is a resource. Maybe you want to secure your a simple pen, or maybe you want to secure your gold chain. Both are resources. You will need a locker to secure it. So how do we secure this? What I want to do is, if someone requests for the homepage, it should first open the login form. Of course, right? There should be a login form. That means we have to create a UI for the login form. That's one. Next, when a user enters the details, the username and password, we have to verify that in the backend. How do I verify that? Maybe I need a database where I will have username passwords. A lot of steps, right? Okay, let's do that in this video, or maybe in the next video, let's see. Okay, maybe you can judge by the length of the video how difficult it will be. So what I will do is I will just go back here to the POM, and I will enable this Spring Security, because now I want to secure it. And just by enabling it, let's see if the application still works. I will just reload the project and let's see what errors you get so that we can focus on the building a login form and other stuff. Okay, so now I'm hitting the same URL, which is localhost 8080. If I enter, oh, this is weird and awesome at the same time. Weird because I was expecting some error, or maybe it should say something that you don't have a login form. And the awesome thing is Spring Security is giving you a login form just by adding that dependency. But the question is it just a login form or is it working? Okay, now that's tricky. First of all, I'm not sure what the username and password is. I'm just guessing. So maybe the username will be user. Actually, the username is user. But what about the password? Is it the user? Let's try. Sign in. No, it's not working. So you can see it says bad credentials. So it is checking something. I'm saying user, password should be Naveen. No, it's not working. Maybe it's not even picking my local, desktop name. So what will be the password and username? Username is user for sure. The password, where do I find the password? Now, if you go to the console and if you scroll up, can you see that? It says using generated security password is this. This is the password. I can simply copy this and go back here and paste it and voila. So just by adding a dependency, it is giving you a login form. It is also giving you the logic to check if the username and password is correct, and it is doing that. Okay. Now let me show you. It's actually working. If I open another tab, another incognito tab here, or private window for Safari, and if I say localhost 8080, it is still asking for the login form. So it maintains the session as well. But if I open a normal tab, or let's say new tab, and if I hit the same URL, it is not asking for the login form. So session is also maintaining. So a lot of things it's doing behind the scene, right? This is cool. Now we got this, right? And this perfectly makes sense. But it also says something. It says this generated password is for development use only. Don't use it in the production. Okay, that's good. Also, we only got one password. In your system, you'll be having multiple users. How do I achieve that? How do we have multiple username password? And now you might be thinking there should be some magic where Spring Security will have all the username password. No, Spring Security is magic, but it's not actually a superhuman. Can I say that? Or in India, we say Rajnikant. I'm not sure how many of you know this context, but yeah. So Spring Security has no idea what username password you will be going to use. And that's why you have to use database. How we are going to do that, let's see in the upcoming videos. But we have to do a lot of work to secure it with the help of username password. But the main thing what it has done is it is giving you a login form. It also gives you one more thing. What if you want to log out? So you can just use a URL here and say log out, enter. It will say, are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. Log out. And then if you're thinking this is just a UI gimmick, no, let me just open this tab once again and I will hit the localhost 8080. It is asking you to sign in again. So log out actually works. It's not just a gimmick where you see a UI which says log out done. It's actually protecting your application. So once you log in, once you log out, it's gone. Okay. And, but yeah, there are a lot of things we have to talk about and we're going to discuss that in the upcoming videos. But at this point, we just added the dependency for Spring Security and it is giving you a login form. If you want to change something, if you want to change a password, you can do that in the resource. So in the application properties, you can set your username passwords here. But again, you can only set only one username password. Maybe you don't want to go for this password every time. So maybe a super root password, you can set it here, username password. But the ideal way is to work with database. So now we got a default form using which you can log in, right? But then I want to change one thing. And then during that process, we'll understand different concepts in between. The thing which I want to change is the username and password, because by default, you are getting a username as user and the password you are getting in the console. I don't want it. I want to have my own password. So that's one thing. But then there are certain things which you have to understand in between. First of all, who is handling the security part here? How exactly, when we are defining the controllers, someone else, that someone else is your page, the login page, is coming in between. How that is possible? Next, I want to talk about this session. So when you log in, I can access the same page multiple times. Not just same page. In the application, if you have multiple controllers, in this case, we only have one. But let's say if you have multiple controllers, do we have to log in for each request? Not exactly, because we have something called session behind the scene. how that session is getting created. And if I want to see the session ID, can I do that? So I want to check that as well. And then what if I don't want to use a login form? What if I want to do that from a Postman? Can I do that? So Postman, basically any REST client, can I do that? So let's try that everything in this video. So first thing, how that login form is coming there when I'm requesting for the home page. See, to understand this, let's go back to the basics of Spring Web. See, when you create controllers, so let's say we have this box here, this is your server, and the most important thing here is the controllers, right? So these are the controllers which you're calling. Now, let's say this is your home controller, this is your add controller, or this is your check balance controller. So let's say if you have a bank account and you want to check your balance. So we got multiple controllers here, right? And a client will send the request, right? So that's how the flow goes, right? So client sends request, response goes from the server to the client, right? Everything is good. Of course, the object here is the HTTP request object. This is HTTP response object, which we get from the server. And this is your container. Now, if we talk about this controller here, behind the scene, these things are running on a servlet container. See, as I mentioned before, Spring Web comes into two parts. One is a servlet way, which we are doing now. And then there's also reactive way. We are not focusing on reactive here, Spring Reactive. We are only focusing on the Spring Web. Now in this, every controller gets converted into servlet behind the scene. So basically you are able to run this on Tomcat because of that servlets. So all these things, all your controller gets converted into servlets. Okay, so this is running on the servlet container. Now this is your Tomcat, which is a servlet container, right? But then before the request goes to the controller, we got something here which is called your front controller. So this is your front controller, also called a dispatcher servlet. So every request from the client, when it goes to the controller which you created, it goes through the dispatcher servlet. But before it goes from the dispatcher servlet, there are more things there. By default, we don't invoke them, or even if they are there, they are just passing it. But we can customize it. So when you add Spring Security, we are calling those things. Those things are responsible. But what are those things? So those things are your filters. So there's a filter chain here. So I don't have horizontal space. I will do that in vertical. So basically what you have is you have something called a filter chain here. So request goes from the client to the filter first. This is your filter chain. And then from here, it goes to the front controller. And then from front controller, it interacts with different controllers here. Now, what is this filter chain? In the filter chain, you will be having multiple filters. This is filter 1, let's say F1. This is filter 2. This is filter 3. And I'm not saying that you'll be having all this filter by default. There might be few filters, there might be more filters. It depends upon how you configure your application. By default, there are certain filters. But then when you talk about Spring Security, it adds its own filter here, okay? So what it does is when the request goes from the client to the server, the Tomcat, it looks for the filter first. Do we have any filters? Now Spring Security says, yes, there are filters, multiple filters, not just one. Let's check what are those filters are. In the earlier version, we used to see those filters here. For some reason, it is not coming in the console. Not sure why. So what I will do is I will ask my Copilot to give me these security filters. Okay, so you can see it is giving you a list of filters, 11 filters, but I think there are more filters which is not showing. So if you scroll down, or if you scroll up, basically here, we got security context persistence filter, we got logout filter, we got username password authentication filter. Now this is what was working when we got the login form. So even if you are accessing for the home controller, it says, hold on, you are not logged in. So let me take care of it. So this filter comes into picture. Then we got login default page generator filter, page authentication filter, request cache aware filter. There are a lot of filter here, as you can see. But I think there are more which is not showing. So there are a lot of filters. Of course, you don't have to remember all because Spring Security will take care of it. But when you want to customize it, yes, you can customize those filters. Then you need to know those filters. And this filter, so F1, F2, which I'm showing here, these are those filters. By default, it applies some filters to you, and that's why it is giving you a login form. Now, behind the scene, how this filter works is it works in a chain format. So when your request goes to the server, it says, okay, let's execute F1. F1 can decide, F1 I can actually change data as well. Let's say if you want to add two numbers, 2 plus 5, it goes to the filter, it checks. Using filter you can check, are those two numbers actually integers, or are there two numbers bigger than 5? So whatever condition you want to add, basically you can do that in the filter. You can change the request, you can change the response as well, because response goes in the same format. So if the request goes like this, the response goes like this, right? So it goes to the filter. So you can change the request, you can change the response, and whatever you want to do. But here we are not changing data, we are just checking if the user is logged in or not. So one of the filter here acts like a login filter. It says, hey, the user is not authenticated. Let's send the login form. Okay, but let's say if the user is logged in already, and by sending the session ID, they can basically check if the user is logged in. Yes, don't ask for the login page. Let's send the request. So that's how this filter works, and it uses something called chain, as I mentioned. So this filter will send request to F2, F2 will send it to F3, F3. So there's something called next filter or do filter chain. So it goes for the next filter. I hope now things are making sense. How exactly when you call a controller, the security part is getting activated is because of these filters. We have talked about a lot of things. Now let's go for the second point, which is the session ID. So when you say this session is getting generated, because if I relaunch this, and of course it will give you a new password. Okay, this is a new password. I will just copy this because I want to re-log in, and just refresh this. Just wanted to make sure I'm not logged in. And now I'll be saying user, and this is a password, sign in. Now I'm logged in, right? And it doesn't matter how many times I refresh, I can still see the same page. It's not like it is giving me the login page. But after logout, it will give the login page. What if you are changing your browser? So when you change your browser, you got a new instance, right? A new particular application. Even that will ask you for the login. Just to show you the proof, I'm opening my Chrome, localhost 8080, it is sending a request for the home page. Now the inspect element of Chrome is better than Safari. I've never tried on Safari, let's try on Chrome. So I will do the same thing again, same password, enter, I'm signed in. How do I check this session ID? You can check it from here, right? So you can just go back here and say inspect more tools and developer tools. Okay, so here, if I refresh once again, let's go back to the network tab, and here if you can see we got continue. So basically that's a query parameter they are sending but not required. This is request for the home page, okay? This is a request for the home page. I will click here, and if you see, there are certain things here. One of the thing is this session ID. If I click on this, you can see session ID. So this is a part of a cookie, and this is your session ID. So that number, the alphanumeric number which you can see here, it's actually hexacode. That's your session ID. And every time you log in, it will change. Let me show you. So we'll just refresh this and now send the request for the logout. Yes, I'm sure. And if I go to logout, new session ID, or is it the same thing? Even I forgot what was session ID before. Doesn't matter. Let's create a new user and new login, sign in, and request for the localhost, because you can see we don't have question mark continue there. So it says localhost, and we got a new session ID there. If you can see, the number has changed, if you remember the old number. But what if I want to print this here in the response, just to see if the session ID is changing or not? You can do that from your code. So just go back here. Now, if I want to print this session ID, what I can do is I can just go back here and get the hold on the HTTP servlet request. So as I mentioned before, behind the scene, everything is servlet, right? Even the controllers are servlet. So it will have two objects, the request object, response object. They're called HTTP servlet request object and HTTP servlet response object. I just want a request now, don't want to play with the response one. So this is the HTTP servlet request object, which I got hold on. Now this request object has multiple methods, and just wanted to confirm. So this HTTP servlet request should be a part of jakarta.servlet.htp package. Okay, with this object, I can simply say request.get session dot get ID. So this will basically return the ID. Let's relaunch the application because we have changed the code and we got a new password. So let's copy this as well. Go back to your browser. I will stick to whichever browser. Safari is there. In fact, let's hit back to Chrome itself. Okay, so first of all, we'll do the, it will log out by default because we have restarted the application. No. Session is still there. Okay, so now let me just log in once again and sign in. So we are logged in, and you can see we are printing the session ID as well. So if I go to localhost, you can see this is the same value, which you can see there, right? I hope you can see this font size, but yeah, this is the same thing. And every time you refresh, you will get the same session ID. And not just for this particular URL, it doesn't matter which URL you go to, you will get the same session ID. But yes, if you delete your cookies, this will be gone. So you will be logged out automatically. It's as simple as that. So that's the session ID which we were trying to print. And of course, we can have multiple controllers. You do that with, let's say, I want to print the about content. I want to add 2 numbers, whatever you want to do. Just check if you're getting the same session ID. Okay, what next? The next thing I want to do is I want to change the username password. I'm not happy with the password which is generating here. How do I change it? See, one of the filter, which is the username authentication filter. If you remember, one of the filter we have here, which is this. This checks if you have your username password mentioned in the property files. If not, it will simply create its own password. What we can do is we can add the username password. So for doing that, you can say spring.security.user.name, and you can mention the name here. So I'm going for a name Naveen, and spring.security.user.password, and I'm going to set this as Telusko. So the username is Naveen, the password is Telusko, and this is a property. Okay, I know in the community version it will not highlight much. If you're using ultimate version, this looks good, but yeah, let's use community. So now with this, let's restart the application and go back to the browser. So first, let's hit the logout, and now we are logged out. So let's try with the user. And in fact, what about the password? Is it generating the password? If you scroll, nowhere it is generating a password because it knows now that you have your own password. So let's try with this password first, which is Telusko. And I will say sign in. No, bad credentials. So now I will try with Naveen and Telusko. Sign in, we are in. Okay, it says save the password. No, because I'm going to change it. Okay, so now if you refresh, you're still logged in and you can access it multiple times. Is that good? Okay, so now you have your own username password. I know what you're thinking. What about different users, different username passwords? We'll do that in the upcoming videos. But yeah, at least we can change the username password. I want to do one final thing, which is logging in through the Postman, or maybe any UI tool or any REST client tool. So I do have Postman in this machine, so I will just fire it. So that's Postman, used it for some other URL. This time I want to hit localhost :8080. This is the home page, and send. Okay, so you can see we got an status code, which is 40401 unauthorized. That means you are not allowed here. You know why you're not allowed? Because you're not sending the username password. How do we send that? So if you can see, we have a tab here, which is authorization. And by default, there is no auth. We have to say, hey, I have a username password. And to do that, you will click on basic auth. There are multiple options here. We got JWT barrier token, multiple options. I will stick to basic auth now, and let's explore others later. Basic auth. So let's enter the username, which is Naveen, and the password is Telusko. In fact, let's give some wrong password. Telusko1, send, still unauthorized. Telusko, and we got the response. It says 200. We are happy. And it generates a new session ID because a new login. So you can see this session ID is not matching with this. So different users, different session ID. Okay, looks good. So that's how basically you can change the username password. You can access it through the Postman. Now we understood also how a filter works. We have seen that in the diagram here. In this video, we'll focus on CSRF, which stands for Cross-Site Request Forgery. But why exactly we have to talk about this? And we'll do that with the help of an example. Okay, so 2 things. One, we'll talk about the theory. We'll also see that how it works in the example which we are doing. So let's get started. So let's say, till this point, what we are doing is we got a client, right, from where you are sending a request. And of course, this client can be a Postman, this client can be a browser or any other application. And then we got a server here, right? And then this is a server which we are building in Spring Boot. So this is your Spring Boot server. And now when a client sends a request, Of course, we are implementing security. That means whenever you send a request from client to server, you have to also send your logging details for the first time. If it is not there, then of course it will say, hey, who are you? You will not get the access. And we were getting the errors, right? So that's why we have to first enter the username password. You have to log in. Now, when you log in, what happens is when you pass the username and password by doing login, what you receive from a server is success, of course. Also, you receive a session ID. So if I want to show you the running project, so this project is not running now. Let's run this and let's hit the URL. So this is a login form you are getting, right? And when you say username, password, so let's say Naveen and Telusko, enter, you got this message, which is welcome to Telusko, but also you received a session ID. So if you refresh this multiple times, every time you will get the same session ID. And that's how the server knows, hey, this person is logged in. So let's not ask for login again, right? So it doesn't matter which URL you hit, you will use this session ID. So that means what you have on your client is the session ID. So every time you send a request, let's say if you want to get details about a particular resource, in that case also you have to send this session ID. So till you have this session ID, whatever the ID is, let's say 1256, that's your ID. Now, if you have this ID, server will verify and server says, okay, you are already authenticated user, I will give you the access. So this is good, right? You don't have to log in multiple times. And I don't remember last time when I used Gmail when I logged in. So basically, every time you use these famous applications, you normally prefer them to have stay signed in, which means every time you go there on your browser, you don't have to log in again. Is it good? Of course, it will save your time. Is it bad? Sometime. Let me tell you why. So let's say I'm using a third-party resource here. Any website which is not good, most of the applications are secure, but let's say if you go for downloading a pirated movie and when you visit a particular website, which is not, of course you get things for free there, but what you don't understand is most of these websites are malicious. They run some script and they will steal from you. Then you will say, how? So let's say I visit to a particular website, which I should not. Let's say I'm downloading a particular crack version of a software. And I'm going to this website and it says, hey, get this software for free. I'm so happy. And then when I'm downloading it, while in that downloading, it will give me some pop-up, allow download, or allow this file access. And you say, okay, allow, everything allow because I want this software. And now this particular script, which is there in the malicious, I will name this as a malicious software. I know my handwriting is bad, but you got the point, right? So if I'm going to this malicious software, what this will do is, this will run some script and it will get this session ID because I'm already signed in from this particular machine, and then it will send the request to the server. Now server thought, hey, I got the request using this session ID and it's valid. So it will give the access. And then this particular malicious software or the website is stealing my information. That's wrong. But it happens. And that's why you should not go to some weird websites. Now, if you talk about this thing, how do we stop this? And this problem is called CSRF, which is cross-site because it is from other website, request forgery because they are doing the request on your behalf. And we need to stop it. And by default, your Spring Security will take care of it. I will show you how. But then when you talk about the protocol called HTTP, it got multiple methods, right? It's not just one. So CSRF works with, when you talk about CSRF, HTTP by default gives you different methods, right? So you work with GET for fetching data, you work with POST, you work with PUT, you work with DELETE. Now, when you talk about these methods like PUT, POST, DELETE, they actually change something on the server. And by default, it will take care of the CSRF. So Spring Security will not allow you to do these operations if you're not handling the CSRF. But GET is a bit normal, right? So GET will, by default, it will allow GET. Now question arises, how will you make it work? How will you secure it? Now, if you go back here, don't you think this session ID is wrong? It should be created every time. So what I feel is you should get a new session ID every time. So it's something like, HTTP by default is stateless, right? So it will not remember who you are. And that's why we have this session ID, which will remind the server, hey, I'm that person. But what if you generate a new session ID every time? So of course, even if someone is hacking your session ID, they can't get access to it. They can't actually access the server. That's one. The next way you can do is every time you send a request to the server should generate a token, a unique token, and you can send that token every time you want to send the request. That will be solved, right? And that is called the CSRF token. Okay, let me show you where we can see that. So if I go to the browser and if I say logout, because we are changing some data from the server now. So if I say logout, of course we got this page. But if you see the view source of this page, okay, now this is the thing. I want to do that on my Chrome browser. So login. No thanks. Okay, so if I do a logout from here, and we got this page, let's go to the view source, and this is a source. Now, if you observe, there are a lot of content, actually not, but yeah, we have some content on top here. But if you see, there is a special input tag, which is by default hidden. It's not there on the page, but then it has a value. So we got the name as _CSRF, and then this is the value. So if you can use this token to send, your job is done. But how will you do that? And how will I know this token, first of all? So to understand this, let's create an example, okay? So let's go back to the project and let's understand this step by step. What I will do is I will create one more controller here. I will say Java class, and I will name this as student controller, okay? And in this, I will have some operations. So first of all, I will just make this as a REST controller. And here, I will have some methods for getting all the students. But I want to represent student as well, right? I should do that in separate package, but since we are into learning phase, I will put that in everything in one package. So that is student. And in this student, I will create some variables. So private int ID and private string name. And let's say marks. So private int marks. Okay, so we got these three fields. And for these three fields, I need getter setters. Of course, I could have used Lombok. But let's say generate getter setters for all the variables. And also I need a constructor, parameterized constructor here for all three variables. And next I need a toString to print it. Okay, so we got this things here in the student, and now in the controller, basically I will create some objects. I'm not making it as a component, is because normally for normal POJOs, you don't make them component, standard practice. Okay, so I will create a method here, which will return me the list of students. So I will say, so let's say from the browser, if I want to access, let's say if I go back here and refresh, it is still working. So let's say if I request for the students, of course you will not get anything because we don't have a mapping for it. So when I call for students, it should print the list of students. So here I can return a list of students, import the package, and here I will say get students. So I should do the mapping as well. So this will be for get mapping, and I'll be doing for /students. So whenever someone requests for this, I will execute this method, and this should return a list of students. I don't have it. So ideally, if you think about the application, it should be, the data should be there in the database. There should be some more layers, repository layer, service layer. But let's say I'm skipping those things now. I will just have that here. Again, not a good idea, but it works for this scenario. So, I mean, for the example, so I will say list of students, and let me have some hard-coded values. So list.of. Okay, so I want to have the first object, new student. It should have some values. Let's say 1, Naveen, and let's say some marks, 60. And let's add only 2 objects. So 2, Kiran, and let's say 65. Okay, so we got 2 students, and now here I want to basically return those two students. So I will say return students. Our job is done, right? So this will return the data. And now if I refresh, let's see if this works. So restart done. Let me go back to my browser and refresh, and you can see we got data. So this is working, right? And this is awesome. So we got this data here. I just want to check if the security is still enabled. Yeah, it's enabled. So you can see we got the data. But what if you want to create a student? So let's say I'll go to my Postman now. This time I'll do it with Postman. And I want to get the students. And if I say send, so you can see we got data, and we are passing the username password as well. But now this time I want to create a new student. So let's say we got these 2 students, and now I want to create a new one. I will just use this data and let's create a new student. So I will go to post request. I want the same URL, but this time post request. And in the body, I want to have this data. So this should be 3. Let's say Harsh, and Harsh got, let's say 70. So we got this data there. And now, ideally what should happen is, it should give you an error that the method is not there. If I click on send, it is saying unauthorized. This is weird. What I will do is, I will go back to my code and I will disable this ping security just to see what happens, what type of errors you get. So Maven reload done. Now we are not implementing Spring Security, and I don't even want to pass the authorization data. I will keep it no auth because we don't have Spring Security now. And in the body, I want this data. First of all, I will try to do send. Okay, so you can see this is the error I was expecting. It says 405 method not allowed, but what you got is unauthorized. Now that is weird. But first of all, let's create this method so that you will not get this error. So go back here to the code and let's create a method which will accept the post mapping. So I will say post mapping, and here I will say /students. The URL is same, but the mapping is different. And this will return a student. Whatever student you're adding, it will return the same student. And I will say add a student. And here basically I want to accept that student. So I will say request body and student. Let's say student. I'm accepting a student. And this student I want to add in the list. How will you add? It's very simple. You say students dot add and you will pass a new student. It's that simple. Again, of course, it should be in the database, but since we are doing hard coding here, this works. And we have to also return the student. So return the student. Whatever you're receiving, let's send that. So we have implemented the method. I will just restart the application and let's see, will it work? Let's go back and click on send. So you can see it says, okay, that's good. And if you try to fetch all the students now, so you can see we got 3 students. So this is working, right? We are happy. But as soon as you enable this Spring Security, let's see what happens. I'm enabling the Spring Security now. Restart. Okay, so let's try to do the get students first. I will click on send. And of course, we are passing authorization, so it will work. But if you go back to post, and now if you try to add the same data, and in the authorization, we have to go for basic auth with the same values. Click on send, it should work, right? It's not. It's because CSRF token is not there. So whenever you do any update request like put, post, and delete, where changing something, CSRF token you have to send, otherwise it will not work. Okay, how will you make it work then? So one thing I'm going to try is, how do you send CSRF token? You can just go back to the headers, and here you have to pass one of the key pair value or key value pair, which is X CSRF hyphen token. This is what token. This is what you have to send. Now I know the key, I don't know the value. Maybe I can get the value from the browser. Not a good idea, but let's try. So I will just go back here and I want to get the token. So I will say localhost /8080. How will I get the token? You get the token from /logout. Don't do the logout. Just go on this page, right click, view page source, and just copy this. This is your token. I will just reduce the size of it so that I can copy in one go. Okay, copy. I'm not sure if this works. Let's try. Paste, send. Oh, it's not working. So maybe I have to generate the token and get it. I thought it will work. Okay, no problem. Let's generate the token from the code, and it might work. You try it out. You try it out and let me know if it is working for you. So I don't want to get that from the browser. Again, it's not a good idea to get it from the browser. Can you return the token from here? So from this particular code. So what you can do is you can request for the token and you can send it. So I will say public, and it should return a CSRF token. So I will say CSRF token. And this is coming from springsecurity.security.web.csrf. And say, maybe I will say get CSRF token. And this should return a token, right? Now, what should be the mapping? Maybe I will say get mapping. And the URL I want here is CSRF token. So when I request for this, it will generate a token for you. Okay, and then you should return a token. Now, how will you do that? That's tricky. See, when you talk about a method like HTTP, okay. So when you talk about a protocol like HTTP and when you're working with servlets, because behind the scenes, Spring is servlet, right? Or Spring MVC is servlet. And if you go back to hello, we have used one of the object type, which is the HTTP servlet request, right? Now, if you get the object of request, you can get a lot of data, including the session ID and also the token. So I can just go back here and say HTTP servlet request. And with this request, okay, where I'm doing that, wrong place, it should be here. And request, okay. And here with the help of that object, so I will say return. So from the request has a lot of methods. One of them is get attribute. Now, what is attribute name? Remember when we were trying to see the browser, not this one, yeah, this one. this is a name, which is underscore CSRF. So I will simply use it here in double quotes, underscore CSRF, and you will get the token, right? But then get attribute gives you a type of object. You want a type of CSRF token. So, it's very simple. You have to just do typecasting. So cast it with this. Your job is done. So what this will do is, this will give you a CSRF token, which you can use to send the request. Let's try. Or maybe the token was not working when we tried with browser. I don't know how I forgot that. We are using two different users, right? The browser is a different user. The Postman is a different user. Okay, so here I will go back to my Postman, not the browser. Where is my Postman? It's here. Okay, so now I will first of all, let's check if the students are working. This is working, but I don't want to request for students. I want to I want to fetch CSRF token and click on the request. And this is token you got. You can see this is a parameter CSRF token, and this is a value. So when you copy, you have to make sure that you copy from double quotes to double quotes and copy. So you can see the header name should be this, X-CSRF-token. And now when you get this token, you can just go to your post request, and in the headers, we got the key, replace the value. This is a value, new value. And I hope this will work. The body is same. Headers we have changed. Send. It worked. Okay, so this is good, right? So this is how basically you generate a token and send it. There are two more ways to handle this. One, in fact, we have talked about one before. What if you simply generate a new session every time? Then you don't have to worry about the CSRF. You can disable it. You can disable the check of it on the server side. And we'll see that how do we do that in upcoming sessions, but you can disable that. Next, you can work with the same site strict. So you can make sure that no other site can access it. So that's one of the way you can do that. So yeah, that's it from this video where we talked about CSRF token. But again, as I mentioned, you can also disable it and make sure that you generate a new session. Basically, you make your HTTP stateless or your session stateless. So till this point, we were able to configure the application, right? And we are basically able to implement Spring Security. But then most of the settings are default, right? So we implemented Spring Security by saying, hey, I got the dependency, this project is secured by Spring Security, and Spring Security says, okay, since you are using me, let me give you some default configuration, and then we have changed something, okay? So basically we went to application properties, we set the username password, we have done some changes. But then we want to do more. We want to connect with database, we want to disable, let's say I don't want to go for a form login. So there are a lot of settings which you have to do, and then we'll do that step by step. In this video, let's see how do we configure that? How do we create our own settings? How do we change the way the security filter chain works? So to do that, of course, we want to change the way it works, right? By default, Spring Security provides you a filter chain. There are a lot of filters which comes into picture and then it will check for the defaults. But now I want to customize it. I want to have my own filter chain. And the way you can do that is by creating a config class. See, when you talk about Spring Framework, and if you want to customize something, or when you want to have your own configuration, you create a separate class, a config class, and then you define beans there, which will inject the object. So now what I will do is, to achieve that, I will create a class, but then I will create that class in a package. I will name this package as config. And in this package, I want to have that class, which is the security config. So this is the class we have. And in this class, we have to do that. First of all, I want to say that this is a configuration file to Spring. And to do that, you will say configuration. Now your Spring knows that this is a configuration class and I have to search for the configuration here. Next, I don't want to go for the default Spring security configuration. I want to implement it here. So to do that, you will say enable web security. Now by doing this, you are saying, hey, don't go for the default flow. Go with the flow which I mentioned here. So by doing this, we are doing two things. First, we are saying this is the configuration and we are saying that go with this configuration. Now what I want to change, see by default it will work for the security filter chain. I want to customize it. So in order to do that, what you have to do is you have to return a bean for security filter chain. So let's do that. So I will create a method which will return you the object of security filter chain, which is coming from springframework.security.web.security filter chain. And then we can give any method name here. So I will say security filter chain. And this will basically give you the object of security chain. But how? So of course you have to return the object of security filter chain. Now who will give you this? So there is a type called HTTP security. You have to use this. Let's create reference for it called HTTP. You can also say HTTP security, but HTTP is a small word, so it makes sense. And I will be using that because HTTP has a method called build. So basically the build here returns the object of security filter chain. Now it is giving you some error here is because we have to add the exception, throws exception here, a signature. Now this will do. So what we are doing is we are saying, hey, Spring Security, don't go for the default. This is a security chain you have to go for. So this is a filter chain, follow this and you're good to go. Now, since we have not specified any filter here, by default, no filter is applied. I will show you. So what I will do is I will just restart this. In fact, let's comment the bean tag. And let's restart then. Or maybe we have to also comment enable security. So I've commented both enable web security and the bean here. That means this is still not applicable what we are doing. And I want to check without those things. If I hit the URL, you can see it is still enabling the login form. So that means Spring Security is still implemented. But if I do this and if I uncomment this bean now, and if I restart, so let's see if it disables the default configuration. So let's go back here and instead of hitting the login, I will hit the URL and it's working. Without login, it is working. So if I refresh, it is still there. That means security is not implemented now. We are bypassing all the security. It's something like you're buying a lock and you have not closing it properly. Or maybe you're not even locking it. So we don't want to do that, right? So let's implement. So how do we secure it? How do we provide that layer? The first thing I want to do is I will implement different security. I want to achieve that login form. I want to maybe send the request through the postman. But the first thing I want to do is I want to disable the CSRF. So let's do that. So I will go back to HTTP because that's the object using which you are creating this build, right? So we have to make some changes in this object of HTTP, which is the object of HTTP security. And in this, the first thing I will do is I will say CSRF. I want to disable this, right? In the initial days, it was very simple. You can simply say CSRF.disable, but it will not work now. In Spring 6, things are a bit different. Now, I will show you this in two steps. One, using the Lambda syntax and one without it. With Lambda, it becomes very easy to read and write. But then if you want to understand what is happening behind the scene, we'll go for imperative as well. So here, I'm saying http.csrf. And to disable it, I will use customizer. Again, I'm not explaining that now. I will do that bit after some time. So I will say customizer.disable. So what we are doing is we are disabling the CSRF. The next thing I want is, even if you write this, you will still not get the login form. I want it to be authorized. So if I don't authorize it, anyone can go there and they can log in. So even if I open a new incognito mode here, so if I go to incognito mode and if I say localhost colon 8080, you can still open it. So there's no login restriction now. And to achieve that, what I will do is I will say http.authorize HTTP request for every request. And people who are good with Lambda expression, they know what I'm writing. But in case if you're not familiar, I will show you the imperative style. So any request should be authenticated. So by doing this, what we are doing is no one should be able to access any page without authentication. So now after making those changes, if I restart my IDE or the application, go back to the browser and say refresh. And now you can see it says access to localhost was denied. That means authentication is applied here. So now that means you have to enter username password. But then where you will do that? Even if I do that in Postman, and let's try to fetch the home page here. And if I say send, you can see it says forbidden. Even if I pass the values, you can see I'm passing the username password. It still says forbidden because you are sending username password. But no way we are using it here. So how do we do that? First of all, I want to enable the form login. So http dot, you can use something called a form login using customizer dot with default. So it will pick up the default properties and it will implement form login. Now, just by saying form login, let's see what happens. So let's go back here and refresh and you can see we got a form login now. Is it working? Let's try. So I will say Naveen Telusko. And it's working. You can see if I refresh, it works. So that means the form login has been implemented. So whatever customization you want to do, you can do that in the code by using this HTTP object. But what about if I try to do that from Postman? Let's try from Postman. And if I say send, okay, we got the status okay, and we are happy about it. But look at the response. Response is basically a login form. Why we got login form here? It's because we are saying form login. That's why we got it. So if you want to do that from the Postman, in that case, you have to add one more thing here, which is HTTP basic. You have to implement this, or you have to enable this for the Postman, for the REST access, REST API access. So let's go back here and see if that Postman is working now. Say send, and you got it. So you can see we got the page. Cool. So we have used two things. One is form login for the browser, and one is HTTP basic. So form login still works. Now logout will not work. Since we're implementing our own, it is expecting you to have your own login page. So logout will not work. Or it will sign out directly. It will not give you login form. So now if I do Naveen and Telusko, okay, wrong password. So you can see it is working. So basically, by doing this, we are enabling that feature. Of course, you can disable your form login if you want. You can directly use your Postman to access it. Next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that you don't see, we are disabling the CSRF, right? Now, why we are disabling it is because in one of the video, we have talked about different ways of handling CSRF. One of them is what if you make your HTTP stateless? And if you do that, you don't have to worry about the session ID. So how do you make it stateless? You have to say HTTP dot session management, and you will take the session object and you will say session dot. How do you specify that you want to go for stateless or stateful? In that case, you have to use something called a session creation policy. So there's something called session creation policy. In this, you have to say session creation policy. So you can see we have different options. We got never, if required, stateless. I want to go for stateless, and job done. So by doing it stateless, what we are doing is, see, the problem with this is you can't log in from your browser with the login form is because for every request you have to pass the credentials. And when you have a form login, let me show you what I'm talking about. So if I refresh and if I say Naveen and Telusko, so it will give you login form again because now you are accessing a new resource. A new resource is a new session, right? New request. So you have to pass this detail every time. But with Postman, this will work. So if I go to Postman, if I say send, you can see this is working. And every time you send a request, you will get a new session ID. If you can see, the number is changing here. So that's how you get the new session ID, right? But if you want this to work on a browser, what you can do is you can disable your form login because then you have to maintain your own sessions. And now if I restart, let's see what happened with the browser. Enter. Okay, so you can see we got a pop-up, not the login form, a pop-up. And in this pop-up, you can say Naveen Telusko, enter, and now it will work. So not with the form login, but HTTP basic will give you this pop-up. Refresh, and if you say enter, you will get new session ID every time. Cool, right? So that's how basically you can do this. But again, the problem is how all these things are working. So what I will do is time being, I will just comment this, everything, and let's see what is happening behind the scenes. So comment, why is not commenting here? Comment. Am I using the wrong, I don't know, shortcut is that? Maybe they have done some changes. So now let's understand what is happening behind the scene. See, we understand what is this object, HTTP object, right? Which is HTTP security. And we also know that method, object will have some methods, right? So we got CSRF. And in this, we are passing this customizer and disable. So what is this thing? To understand this thing, let's do that in an imperative way. So I will say HTTP dot, and I will use this method, which is CSRF. And if you observe CSRF, you can see what it takes. It takes the object of customizer. In fact, that's a big name. Can't even copy this. So yeah, we have a big name, customizer. The type it takes is CSRF configure. The type, and again, the type is HTTP security. I hope I will remember this. So I will say customizer. So that's a part of security config package. And this will take CSRF configurer. And it was taking something, I forgot. So let me just say control space again. I don't want to do dictate. HTTP security object. So inside this, it should be HTTP security. So this is a type you have to work with, okay? And then let's create the object of it. Because CSRF method takes the object of customizer of type CSRF configure of type HTTP security. And let's give a name to it. I will say cust or CSRF cust. Cust CSRF equal to, and then you have to say new, and the object for this. Now, the customizer itself is an interface. You can see we have the interface and the method name is customize. That means if you are using this, if you want to get the object of it, we have to create a method. You have to define the method of it using anonymous in a class. Okay, and in this particular method, using this object, I will not use a name as HTTP configurer, CSRF configurer. I can use any other name. I will say customizer. I mean, you can use any name, right? So the name I'm using here is customizer. And using this object, I can do whatever I want now. So using customizer, you can use different methods. What we are using it for is disable, right? Now, this is the way you create the object of customizer, CSRF configure, HTTP security, because this object you have to pass inside http.csrf. I'll pass this object and your job is done. So by doing all these things, you are disabling your CSRF. Oh, let the task, right? Now, since this is an interface and this is a functional interface, if I show you configure, this is a functional interface, which means you can use Lambda here. And people who are familiar with Lambda, they know how to create Lambda. It's very simple. You remove the extra stuff. And if you don't know Lambda, just search for Lambda expression on YouTube or Telusko Lambda, Java Lambda. That should make sense. So you can replace the entire code, this entire code with one line. So this line here, which I've written, is equal to this number of lines. Oh, we can do the same thing for authorize request. Let's try that. http.authorize HTTP request, and look what it is asking you for. Look at the name. Customizer authorization manager request matcher registry, and then you have to create object for this, and then you have to pass it in the method like authorize HTTP request. Same goes for the HTTP basic. Let's try for that. HTTP basic. It is asking you for the object of, again, customizer. But since we want to go for default configuration, we are not changing anything. We are saying customizer with defaults. So it will pick up the default settings. And that's how it is working behind the scene. And now you know what is happening behind. So for all the methods here, same thing. You have to implement certain interface and define the method and pass the object here. Another thing which you can do here is, instead of doing all these things one by one, you can use a builder pattern. What I'm saying is, remove this semicolon and remove this HTTP. So you can just add at the end something like this. So http.csrf, that particular setting, then authorize request, and then I will just put that below somewhere. Okay, what's wrong with my ID settings? All the settings have been changed. This is weird. Okay, I will just say enter here. Remove this semicolon. And now you can put this after this. So you can see for one object, you are applying different settings. I can remove this. And the same thing goes for this part. Cut and paste it here. Just that you don't have to put semicolon at the end and put it together. If it is big, you can just say enter here to make it more readable and remove this. So by doing this, you are making it more readable and in proper sequence. So this is called builder pattern. So for this object, you are doing this, then you are doing this. You know, when you have a belt in the factory where the object passes from one machine to other machine, same thing is happening here. One object is passing to different methods and customizing it. In fact, what you can also do is you can directly say return here. Then you don't have to write return again. It's just that at the end, you have to say dot build. Even this looks cool. So that's it. Let me just run this after making all those changes. I hope this will work. If you see a warning here, just that it is saying you to use method reference instead of Lambda. You can replace this method reference or Lambda to method reference, even that works. Okay, restart done. Let's verify from the postman. Hit this, you're getting the response. Maybe I'll also try to work with students if you're getting all the students, and you got it. Okay, let's also see if the post request is working. So I will say post. You can see we have a post request here. I'm sending the headers. Okay, we are sending CSRF token. Let's not send it. And done. You can see it is working. So even without the token, it is working because we are disabling the CSRF request or CSRF setting. Things are working out. Basically, we were able to secure the application with the help of Spring Security, and then we were able to log in as well. But the only thing is we are able to log in with the help of this username and password. What I want to achieve is I want this data to be coming from database because we can have multiple username password. And even if Spring Security says, hey, let me give you an option of having more users here, don't you think we are hard-coding the values? In the real world, we don't do that. So we want to store this data in database and fetch it from database to verify the user. That should make much more sense. But if you want to do that, there are multiple steps involved and a lot of steps. And that's why if you can see the video is lengthy. The thing is, when you build applications, huge applications, which will go for months or years, the setup like Spring Security and database connections will hardly take 1 or 2 days, or maybe more, depending upon the complexity of your project. But then you do that only once, not for the entire time of the project. You do this setting once and you just use it. In the remaining time, which is a lot of time, you focus on building a feature, right? Whatever logic, business logic you want to implement. So in this video, let's do that initial part of work of securing the application, and let's see how that works. Again, video is a bit lengthy, so just bear with me, and I will do step by step. So make sure that you practice when you are watching this so that it will make much more sense. Okay, so let's go back to the security config. Now, what is happening is, whenever you log in, of course, Spring Security is using the application properties to verify the username password, but who is working behind the scene? If you remember, we have talked about different filters. In fact, we have asked our Copilot as well, what are different filters we have. One of the filter, which is username password authentication filter. Now that filter is responsible to verify or to take the username password and get it verified. And who is responsible to do that? So somewhere in between, we have something called a user details service. See, in the application, when you talk about different layers, like web application, we have different layers, right? We got controller, we got service, we got repo layer. And when a client sends a request goes to the controller says, okay, my job is to only accept the request and respond. But if you want to do any processing, that will be done in the service layer. What if you want to do some database connection? That's where you have repository layer, right? Now, here, to verify the username password, we can use something called a user details service. Now, by default, it was getting used, but I want to customize it. I don't want it to use the application properties. I want it to verify the way I want. And how do we do that? It's very simple. You can ask, hey, don't use the default one, use mine, which I'm giving you. But how you will give it something to the Spring Security. And that's where what we can do is we can create a bean. Because when you create a bean will be in the Spring container, and your Spring Security will pick it from there. So what bean I want to create? I want to create a bean of user details service. This is the inbuilt thing inside the Spring Security. And I will say user details service. What I want to do is just return this object. My job is done, right? So it will behave the way I want. I'm happy. But then how will you create the object of it? First of all, let's verify the package for this. So if you see here, the package is springframeworks.security.core.userdetails service. And now I just have to return the object of it. How difficult that can be? I can simply say return new user details service. Okay, but the syntax is a bit different. We are getting curly brackets as well. What is user details service? If I click on this, oh, it's an interface. I was not expecting interface. The thing is, if you have interface, you can't get the object of it. Then we have to go for a long way. What is a long way? Either we have to get the implementation of it, or we can use some inbuilt implementations. We have to create a class which implements this, but we'll do that later. At this point, let's go step by step and use something which is inbuilt. So I'm going to use a class which implements user details service, and that is in-memory user details manager. Okay, how do I verify that this class implements the user details service? You can click on this, and this is a constructor. If you go up, it's a class. That's a good thing. That means we can create the object. And this implements user details manager. Okay. If I click on this extends user details service. So our job is done. So indirectly, in memory, user details manager is implementing user details service. Okay, is our job done here? Not exactly. We are simply returning an empty object, right? Or the object which is not having any value. So it will work and it will not work. It will work because it will run. It will not work is because if you provide the username password, how it will verify. I want to show you something, and I'm expecting it will work the way I want. Let's see. I'm going to enter the same username password when I'm logged in, or when I'm trying to log in, and let's see if that works. So the username is Naveen, password is Telusko. And if I go back to, I will try with Postman, at least you can see the username password there, right? I can go to authorization. You can see the username password is Naveen and Telusko. I'm going to try to hit students, let's say, not the get request, or sorry, not the post request, but the get request for the students. And let's verify the authorization once again. It's Naveen and Telusko. Enter. You can say it failed, 401 unauthorized. So why it's not working is because now we are not using default service. We are basically returning our own user details service object. And if you want to do that, you have to customize this. Now, how will you do that? Now, if you look at the constructor of in-memory user details service, there are multiple constructors. Let's go to it in this. You can see it has a constructor which is empty. It also has a constructor which takes the collections of users, okay? And we got one more which takes a varargs. Basically, we can pass different user objects by giving commas, or user details objects by giving commas. Let's use this. So what I want to do is I want to return different objects or different users. How will I do that? It's very simple. You come back here, and if you remember, it was taking the object of user details. So let's create the object of user details. And if you see user details, oh, even this is interface. Okay, a lot of interface to deal with. That means we have to get a class for this to implement. Not exactly, I will show you something. So we'll say user details, I will say user1 is equal to, let's use a class called user. So there's inbuilt user in the Spring framework. And if I click on user, it is a class. And this implements user details. And it got a lot of methods. One of the methods which we are going to use is the builder. So we are going to use the builder. Okay. So to achieve that, what we can do is we can say user, since it's a builder pattern, I will say enter and dot, dot, dot. The first thing I want to assign is the password encoder. See, the thing is, whenever you store data in database or whatever data you are saving, by default, we store that in a plain text. What I want to do here is, let's say if I want to store the username, and if I store that in a plain text, that's fine. But if you want to store a password, it's a plain text, anyone can read it. Not a good idea, right? So you should do encoding of your password so that no one can read it. So at this point, I don't want to make it complex. So I will just go with the default password encoder. So I will say with default password encoder. And this is deprecated, don't use it. I'm just showing you so that since we are learning into learning phase, I can show you anything. But don't use it in production. Next, I want to assign is a username. So let's say the first user is Kiran. Let's not use Naveen now because we have used it before. So let's use Kiran. The password I want to mention is k@123. Then I also want to assign the roles. Again, it is optional, but let's say I want to assign a role. So Kiran is user here, and the password, then once it is done, so we got the username, password, and role, I can simply say build. Now by doing this build, we can build this particular object. And this build, so not the builder, I think I have talked about builder or build. Okay, that doesn't matter. So this build returns the object of user details. And that's what we wanted, right? So we got our first user. We can create more users if I want. Otherwise, I can simply pass this user1, and our job is done. But let's say if I want to pass one more, just for the experiment, this is user2. And let's say Harsh is h@123. And let's say Harsh is an admin. So we can create different roles, maybe user, admin, trainer, or anything you want. Anyway, and then I can pass different users here, not just one, multiple. Now, since it supports varargs, you can pass any number of users just by giving comma. Okay, still till this point, we have not connected with database. Okay, we are still trying to understand how do we customize stuff. Okay, let's see if this works. Let's restart the application. We can use browser, or maybe I will just try to do that with the Postman. This time I will go for Naveen and Telusko. It should not work. And if I use Kiran and the password is k@123, I could have used browser, but then on browser, you can't see the password. I want you to see the password. If I click on send, it says okay. So this is working. If I give a wrong password, of course, this should not work. Let's try with Harsh as well. And Harsh is h@123. Let's say in 1234, it should not work. And 123, it should work, and it's working. So that's how basically you can customize or you can have different users. But again, not a good idea still. It's because we are still using the hard-coded values in the code. I want this to be coming from database. In that case, we can't use this. It's because this thing is actually returning the default one. So comment. Okay, next step. Now we want to work with database. How do I do that? See, if you want to work with database, we have to understand one more concept. See, whenever you pass the details, username and password in the login form, that object, when your server receives it, it's basically an authentication object, which is still not authenticated. It goes to something called authentication provider, who will basically provide the service of checking it and validating it and then make it as an authentication object. By default, it's running behind the scene, but now I want to customize it because this time I don't want to use a default authentication provider. I want to use mine. And that authentication provider can be used to connect with database, to some LDAP service or some other service. And for database, we have a different authentication provider, and let's use that. So basically what I'm trying to say is, let's create a bean to change our authentication provider itself altogether. And I'm not going to use the default one, so let's create our own. So public authentication provider, and I will say authentication provider, there's a method name. And let's return the object of authentication provider. How difficult it can be. We can simply create the object and return. If I click on authentication provider, it's back. So interface is back. It's an interface. So that means we have to look for a class which implements authentication provider. As I mentioned before, there are multiple authentication providers, right? One of them is for database, and that is called a DAO authentication provider. So let's use that. So DAO authentication provider. And if you see, this is a class, a relief, okay? And okay, so it actually extends abstract user details authentication provider. If I click on this, it implements authentication provider. So indirectly it is implementing it, and we should be happy with it. Let me close all the extra files which is open here. Even this. And let's say this is a provider equal to new DAO authentication provider, and simply return this. Our job is done, right? Actually not. Now what's wrong with this? See, this will return the object for sure. Okay, this should return the object. But the problem is, this one basically need to connect with database and get the data. And at this point, we don't even have the database. We don't even have, I mean, we have not specified who is our DBMS. We are going to use Postgres, by the way. It has no idea what is your table name, database name, nothing we have mentioned. And that thing we have to do first. So we'll do that sometime. But if you want to specify those things, what we have to do is, we have to go to provider. The first thing you have to mention is, I want to use a password encoder, which is the default password encoder, which is no op password encoder dot get instance. So what we are doing is, we are not using any password encoder. You can use that. I will show you that later. How do we use some different password encoders? At this point, I'm saying there's no password encoder, default one. So you will see the plain text. Next, I want to specify before returning this object is the user details service. If you remember, at the start also I mentioned that behind the scene, user details service works, and that is responsible to verify it. And now I'm saying that I want to even change the authentication provider. It will also use the user details service. We have to specify that. So I will create my own user details service, not the bean which we created, but somewhere here. I want it to inject the object. I want Spring to inject this object at AutoWired. But unfortunately, even Spring will have no idea how do we provide this, or maybe Spring will provide a default one. I don't want default one. I want to customize it. I want to have my own user details service. Okay, how do we create our own user details service? It's very easy, right? This is the interface. The only thing we have to do is create a class. That will make our job easy, right? Okay, so let's create a class called user details service, or maybe some other name which implements user details service. And before I do that, I just want to make some changes. I want to get different packages. We are not keeping things in a proper package. So I will say controller package. We already got config. So we got controller. I want to have a service package. I want to have a repo package. I want to have a model package. Okay, so the reason I'm doing this is because the controller should be a part of a controller, right? The home controller should be part of hello controller. The student controller should be part of the controller package. The student, which is a model, should be part of a model. And that's it. Now in this service, basically I want to create a class which implements the user details service. And I will say my user details service. I can also say Telusko user details service, but that's fine. And this implements user details service. As simple as that. The only thing you have to do is, first of all, let's mark it as a service. Second, I want to, you can see we got an error here. It's because in user details service, we got a method. We have to implement this method, which is load user by username. So, okay, it's simple. You can just come back here and say implement the methods, which is load user by username, and do something. Okay, I'm not sure what to do. It just said load user by username. This is tricky. How will I load the user by username? And from where I have to load it? See, that's where we have to think about layers. Now, we have a service, right? And service says, I want to get some data, and data should be coming from database. And who is that layer who will give you the data? It's your repo, right? So that means if you want this to fetch the data, we need a repo layer. So I can simply go back here and create in the repo, I can create a class. It's actually an interface, because if you remember, we have talked about JPA. In JPA, you define the interface for the repo, and it will give you all the methods. So I will say this, not student, what you are working with. So I will say user repo, and this repo will extend the JPA repository. The thing it is not working is because we have not added the dependencies. See, till this point, the project is still a simple web application, right? Nowhere we have talked about the JPA, nowhere we have talked about database. So that means if you want that dependency, we have to add two dependencies, one for the JPA and one for the Postgres. Now, as your DBMS changes, you can use different DBMS driver here. So I will go back here and I want some dependencies. To achieve that, I will go back to my browser and I will go to MVN repository. And here I will search for Spring Boot JPA. The first one. Which version? Anyway, we are going to remove the version, so anything you pick up that works. And just copy this, not the entire stuff. It also promotes their own website. It's a good thing, but I want to keep it clean. I don't want to specify the version because that's something we have specified up here. If you can see, yeah, we have specified the version in the parent. So we don't have to specify that here. Okay, that's one. The next dependency I want is for Postgres. Now, depending upon which DBMS you use, you can change it. So let's say if I want to use Postgres SQL DDBC, this is a driver. If you want to use MySQL, search for MySQL driver. And from this, I will pick up the one which is not vulnerable, which is this one. Again, it might be vulnerable. It's just that they have not tested it properly. So I can just copy this and paste it here. So we got two dependencies. And once you add them, you just have to reload your Maven. So it will download dependency for you. Okay, I think dependency added. Let's go back to the repo, the user repo. And let's see if you can get the dependency now. So we'll just cut this, control space. Yeah, now I got it. So it says JPA repository. We have to pass two things. One is the class which will refer to the table. I will explain that in some time. And the primary key. So the primary key is integer. Now, in fact, you don't even need the primary key as an integer. Okay, we'll see that. So what we can do is, when you talk about JPA repository or the concept of data JPA, you define a model class. So for a table, so of course in your database you'll be having a table. In fact, let's do that. Let's do step by step. It will make much more sense. Now, since I'm using Postgres, you can use any DBMS which you want. I'm going to use Postgres. Okay. And to do that, I will open my pgadmin. So in this machine, I already have Postgres, already have pgadmin installed. So make sure that you download Postgres, get pgadmin. If you want a shortcut way, you can just go to Postgres download. For Mac, they have done something new. Not sure about Linux or Windows. So you can get something called postgres.app. I'm not sure if this works on Windows, but for Mac, we have this. For Windows, anyway, the setup is very easy for Postgres. For Mac, you can just get this and run it. It will work. By default, the username will be your system username and your password will be blank. So you can use that. So it depends upon how you configure this. So I got my pgadmin open. I will explore the databases. In this, I got Telusko database. I'm going to use the same one. And if you see there are different tables here, let's ignore all. In fact, there's also user. Okay, let's not use Telusko database. Let's create our own. So I will click on database. I will say create a database and let's name it Telusko 1. Not a good name for database, but that works. Click on save. So now we got different database. And in this, if you say schema, we don't have any table. You can see it's empty. So now let's create a table here. So I can just open the query tool here and say create table. So create table users. In fact, you can also get this done from the code itself using JPA. But I want to show you, let's say if you already have a table, how do you make it work? So we got table and let's say we have 3 values, username and password. So the type of ID should be integer. And this should be also be primary key. The username is text. The password is also text. And let's execute this. So what this will do is this will basically create a table for you. And now let's see if you have data. So I will say select star from users and run this. It's empty. Let's insert some data. So I will say insert into users, values. I want to insert 1. That's my ID. Then I have to enter username, which is, let's say, Naveen. And the password is, let's say, n@123. I want to have one more user. Let's go with 2 users. So I will say 2, not double quotes, single quotes, Sushil. And the password is s@123. So we got 2 users. And I will simply execute this line. Okay, I think it executes both the lines. Okay, so select and run works. So you can see we got the data here. And now I want to basically connect them. So we got table, right? Now in JPA, when you want to connect your table with the code, basically what you do is you create a class which represents it. So let's go back here. So we need a class like user which connects with your table, and the user class should represent the users table. The reason I went for users in Postgres is because I think user table is already there for the Postgres inbuilt implementation, so it doesn't allow. You can just check and let me know in the comments. But here I'm using user, or maybe we should create users, even that makes sense. So let's create this class. We don't have this class users. And where will you do this? You will do that in the model. So in the model, I will right click, I will say new class, and I will name this as users. So what are the things we need here? First of all, we need to basically represent your table and a class, right? So I will say primary int ID, primary string username, and private string, did I say primary before? Ignore. I will say password. And in this, I will say @ID because that's my primary key. And I'm assuming that you know JP, okay? I'm not teaching you JP here. So I will say entity, and that's done. Our job is done here. But we need getter setters for this. So I will say generate getter setters for all 3 variables. And maybe in future, if you want to print it, you will also use the toString for all the variables. Okay, it says one problem. What is that one problem? Okay, we have to import the package. That's the problem? Don't tell me. Okay, that's it. Looks like our job is done. Is it? Let's see. Let's go back here. And now, since I already have a user repo, now we have a power to connect with database. I'm so happy. No, actually, we don't have a power. It's because even if your user repo says it is connecting, nowhere in the application we have specified which DBMS you are working with. What is your username for that DBMS? What's your password? Let's configure that first. And we will do that in the application properties. So here, basically, we have to specify different properties. One is Spring Data Source .url, and we have to specify the URL for JDBC, which is JDBC:PostgreSQL. Now, depending upon which DBMS you're using, if you're using MySQL, replace MySQL there, //localhost, this remains same, then you have to specify the port number for the DBMS. Now, since we are using Postgres, the port number is 5432. For MySQL, it is 3306. Depending upon which DBMS you use, just change the port number, change the name here, and then / your database name, Telusko1. Next, we have to mention the username. So data source dot username is equal to, I think it is Postgres for my machine, and the password. So spring dot data source dot password, and the password for this machine is 0000. Okay, so now we have specified which DBMS you're working with. We have specified the username and password. This should work, but it will not. The reason, I mentioned that we have a lot of things to do. So just bear with me. This is looking good. Let's go back to the my user detail services because we are still returning null. We don't want to return null. What we want to do is, we want this to connect with the user repo. So I will say private user repo, and I will say this is auto-wired. And for the repo, I have to mention that this is the repository. Okay. And now, basically, with the help of this repo, I can fetch. Now, what do you fetch? If you see the method name is load user by username, that means we are getting username here. We just have to verify if the user exists in the database. So I can say users, user1, or maybe a user is equal to, I can say repo dot. Now, in the repo, we have a lot of methods, right? We got find by ID and all those stuff. But then now we don't have to find by ID. We have to find by the username. So I have to say find by username and just pass the username, right? And in the repo, we can use DSL and we can say users find by username, and we can specify the username. So now basically we got this method and this will return the user. And we just have to check if the user is there. We can say if the user is equal to null, in that case, I want to print on the console as well. First of all, let's print on the console that the user not found. Okay, how will you let your system know that the user not found? If you observe, this particular method returns user not found exception. What if you can just throw it? So here you can say throw new user not found exception with the same message, user not found. It's that simple. But what if you found the user? In that case, what you will return? It's very simple. In that case, you will return the object of user details. Okay, and if you see, the video is still not completed. We still have to work with the user details. Okay, now if you click on user details, I can simply create the object of user details, right? You can say new user details, but unfortunately, user details is an interface. You can see I here. That means we have to look for a class which implements this, or we have to create our own class. And the idea is create your own class. So many classes, right? But as I mentioned, this is just one-time setup. Okay, so let's go back to your model and let's create the user details, or maybe you can call it something else. You can say my user details, or you can say user principal. So normally in the terms of Spring Security, the user principals refer to the current user who is trying to access or who is trying to log in. And that's a user we are checking, right? So instead of saying my user details, you can say user principal. But user principals implement the user details. That's what we are trying to implement. And if you see the list of methods we have to implement, let's go back here. And if you click on user details, look at the methods. So many methods to implement. Okay, we don't have a choice. So I will just go back here and say implement the methods, all the methods. So we got all the methods here. Okay, now is it difficult to implement all? See, when you're building a full-fledged application, yes, you have to mention everything. But in this example, I'm going to skip certain things. Example, you can see we have different methods which returns Boolean. Example, is it enabled? We have to return something. At this point, I'm assuming that the account is enabled, so I will say true. Is credentials not expired? True, it's not expired yet. Is account non-locked? Yes, it is not locked. Of course, in the big application, you have to take care of all those stuff. Is account not expired? No. True. Get username? I can't say true now because we have to actually return the username. We have to actually return the password, and we have to actually return the authorities, the roles. We can even skip roles if you want, but let's try to implement that. But the question is, if I'm creating this class, which is user principals, or which is implementing user details, how will I return these values? I don't have these values. You don't have it. But from the class where you want to access this has these values. You can see in users, we have these values. So the username and password is there. So what I can do is I can simply create the object of user principal, and we can pass this object. Our job is done, right? Once you pass it, you can accept it here, and then you can get the value. You just wanted the values, right? I can just right click here, say generate a constructor, which can take, okay, I could have written this by myself. I will say private users user, and let's pass users user, and this dot user is equal to user. So what we are doing is we are basically assigning this object, which is coming from the constructor, to the user. And once you got the hold on the object, I can just go back here. For the username, I can say user dot get username, password user dot get password. And for this collection, now we have to return the roles, right? Because one user can have multiple roles. And in the database, we are not even working with it. How do I handle this here? So maybe we can return some static values or null. So let's return the static values. I will say new, but it is asking you for the object type of granted authority. Okay, so I will return. So there's a class which implements this. So I will say simple granted authority, and I can pass the role as user. So by default, every user will be getting the access as user. Now the only thing is we can't return a single object. It was expecting a collection. Okay, so I will say collections dot. If you want to return only one object, there is a method called singleton. Let's use that. Okay, after talking for so long, I hope this will work. Let's try. So let's try. Let's see if this works, and then I will explain. Let's go back to everything step by step. So let's restart the application and go back to the Postman. Let's see. We don't have Hirsch in database, do we? No. Click on send. You can see this is unauthorized. But what we have in database, let me verify the database fields once. So we got Naveen, or let's say we work with Sushil. And Sushil is username and password is s@123. So it is Sushil and it is S. Let's try with wrong password. Okay, unauthorized. Let's work with the right password. It worked. Okay. So after so long, things are working out. So data is coming from database. But still, we have one thing to do, which we'll do in the next video, which is we have not encrypted the password. So yeah, let's try with Naveen if Naveen is working. So Naveen, and it's n@123. So this is working. Let's go through the code once and understand what we have done. The first thing we are doing is we are making the changes. Okay, let's talk about the XML first. We have added two dependencies, one for JPA because we are working with database, and which database we are working with Postgres. That's one thing. Next, we have done some changes in the application properties. We have added the URL, username, and password. So the URL is this for Postgres, username for Postgres, and password for Postgres. Then we have to basically configure this security config. By default, it was using some authentication provider. We are saying, let me provide authentication provider, which is the DAO authentication provider. To make it work, you have to pass two things. First, password encoder. And second, the user details service, our own user details service. And since we want our own, we have to create our own class, which we are doing here. And this says, okay, you can create this class. You just have to implement one method, which is load user by username. To make it work, we need to work with the repo because repo will do the database connectivity. If it is connected, you got the data, it's good. You say return the data or return the object. If not, you can print user not found. In fact, when I was testing it, we also got a message here. You can see user not found. Okay, so you can do this, but then you can't simply return this user service, user principal, is because we have to implement the user details interface there, which has so many methods. We just are concerned about the username, password, and the authorities. So that's all in the code. Make sure that you check the code. Okay, you will find the link in description. And do that once. Do this code by yourself, then it will make sense. I know there are a lot of files to work with, and we have spent enough time to understand this. It's time to focus on encrypting your passwords. Now, what I'm talking about is when you go back to database, of course, we do have now users in the database. In fact, we have added few users, right? And if I want to show you the users, if I say select star from users here in the database, and if I hit the query, these are our users. The problem here is I can see the passwords, okay? Imagine you are running some huge applications, a critical application, and then you open your database and you can see the user's password. And most of us use the same password on multiple platforms. Not a good idea, okay, never do that, but yeah, people do that, right? So they have the same password on multiple platforms. So that's how you get hacked, right? I mean, not just one thing where if I'm a database administrator, if I can see the passwords, that's one risk. But what if you are using certain application and then most of the applications which are using are safe, this particular application is not safe, and someone was able to hack it, they got your password, and then they're using these passwords everywhere. So again, don't do that. Don't use the same password everywhere. But again, the problem here is we are not encrypting the password. You can still say it. So what's the ideal way here? What I can think about is, let me just go back to my IDE and let's use some area to type what I'm talking about. Okay, which is empty file. So this looks like an empty file, right? So I will just use this area. So what we can do is we can take a plain text from the user. Okay, so user will say n@123. And before I store that in database, what I can do is I can simply encrypt it, right? So we can get a cipher format. So we got a ciphertext in the database. If a user is trying to basically verify, you can convert that ciphertext into plain text and then you can verify, right? That's one way. But the problem is when you talk about encryption, like cryptography, we use a key there, right? And using a key, you can basically do this encryption and decryption. But the problem is, what if the key gets leaked? And of course, for all the users, you'll be using the same key. If one password is compromised and if someone got the key, they can basically get all the passwords. We don't want that, right? So instead of creating a ciphertext, what if you can create a hash of it? Now, what is hashing? So basically, hashing is one way. So if you get a plain text, you run some algorithm on it, let's say SHA or MD5, and then you find a hash. Hash is like a fingerprint for a text. For me, this is my fingerprint. And imagine if I change any part of my body, let's say if I remove the specs, the fingerprint should change. That's how basically hashing works. And you can't get back. So from the fingerprint, you can't get the person, but from a person, you can get the fingerprint. That's how hashing works. So from the plain text, you can get the hash, but from the hash, you can't get the plain text. And we can use different algorithms to achieve that. One of the algorithm is SHA 256, but you can do that only once, right? You can run one round. But what if you can do multiple times? Same thing, get the plain text, run the algorithm, get the hash, run the algorithm on the hash, and again, you will get a new hash. So let's say this is hash 1. Again, you run the algorithm, you got hash 2 and multiple times. How many times? Maybe 10, 15, 20, 100, millions. So if you do it more, and if it takes some time for the computation, of course, you can secure it. And to achieve that, we are going to use something called Bcrypt. Okay, so let's head back to the browser. And here I want to search for Bcrypt generate password. There are different websites we can go through. One of the things which I use is sometimes I use Bcrypt online or browserling. So let me go to browserling. How do you pronounce it? Browserling? Browserling? Doesn't matter. So here we got this Bcrypt password generator. So basically it finds the hash and you can do multiple rounds for it. Okay, so let me just enter the password. So let's say if I say n@123, and if I click on Bcrypt, you can see it is generating a password for you. So basically not a password, but the hash value of it. And this is the hash value. So from the password or from the text, you can get the hash value, but not other way around. So you can't basically get the text from the hash. And you can see it is world's simplest online Bcrypt hasher. Okay, I'm not sponsored by this link. I hope they will soon. But yeah, we got this thing here. But if you observe, we have one more thing, which is rounds. As I mentioned before, you can talk about the rounds, right? 1 round, 2 rounds. So it says 10. Does it mean 10 rounds? No, it's actually 2 the power of 10 rounds. You can imagine how big the number is. And we can also go for 12 rounds, and we are going to use 12 rounds. And if you see, when I change that number, observe this. With 10 rounds, it gives you this text. This is a type of Bcrypt. So there are different types we can use, or different versions we can use. This is 2A. There's also 2Y. The different versions. And this 10 here means the rounds. So if I say 12 now, if I click on Bcrypt, you will get a different number. So you can see we got 12 here. And the hash also changes. So the bigger the number, it is difficult to crack. But again, by doing this, you might be thinking, what if I say 100? And I want to make it more secure. You can do that. You can click on Bcrypt and okay, it exceeds the limit. But let's say if you give a bigger number and you have no idea, okay, it's still calculating. That's the problem. You can see I clicked on Bcrypt, it is still calculating it. Imagine you are using this on your server and every time a user login, you will run all this number of rounds on your server. Imagine the bill as well. If you're using Amazon, imagine for even verifying a user, they will charge you a lot. And that's why 30 is not a good number, and it's still not going ahead. Maybe I can go with 15 if that works, and I hope it will come back. Gone. We'll try with again some text here. Round, let's say 15. So the higher the number, it will take more time. You can see it is still calculating. So better 10, 12 works. And we are going to use 12. Again, okay, we got 15. So yeah, it takes time. So don't go for a bigger number. 12 works, and I will stick to 12. Click on Bcrypt, and this is the thing. Okay. Now, once we understood this, now what we have to do is we have to implement this in our project so that every time a user is logged in or every time a user creates an account, at that time when you ask for the password, don't store the plain text. So that means we have to do 2 things. One, we have to implement Bcrypt when a user registers. And we have to implement Bcrypt when also we are validating it. So let's do for the registration. And as you can see in the project, we have not done the registration part yet. In the earlier video, we had the user in the database, right? So we went for some SQL query, and where's our PG admin? It's here. Let me make it full screen. Browser full screen. Yeah. So we already have these values, but now I want to create a new user. So what I will do is I will go back here to the code, and let's create a controller for this. So for the creation, we'll create a Java class and we'll say user controller. And in this, basically, first of all, we have to make this as a REST controller. That's the first thing. And next, I want to register a user. So I will say public, I want to return the user, and the class we are using is users, not user. And we have to import the package for this. Again, the reason I'm using users, not user makes sense, but then if you say user, it's an inbuilt class inside Spring Security. So sometime you will import some wrong package and it will give you errors. And that's why on the safer side, I'm going with users. Normally we use user. And I will say register. And while you're registering it, of course, you will receive the data from a client. So I will say request body and users, user. And we have to also pass the post mapping because we are submitting data from the client. And this will be /register. Okay, now here basically the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to return the user itself as it is. But don't you think I want to store this in database? That's our aim. Okay, so to do that, I will need a service layer. So I will go back to my service and here I will create a new class, a user service class. I will say users. Oh, do we have user service? No, we don't. User service. And the job of user service is just to accept that particular request, right? So, and it will return the users. And I will say save user, or maybe we can say register itself, register. And this will basically take the object of users, user. And who will store this in database? Of course, service is accepting it. And I forgot to write service, yeah. So service is accepting it from the controller, but service will say, that's not my job. If you want to store something in database, send it to database. And to do that, we are going to use the repository layer, right? And we already have it here, user repo. So I can simply use user repo in my service and I will close certain things here, which we don't need at this point. Home controller not required, user principal not required, my detail service not required, student controller we don't require. Okay, so let's head back to the service and let's create the reference for the user repo. So user repo, and on top of this, I will say auto-wire so that I don't have to create the object. And here, I will simply say repo dot, I want to save. So we can simply say save and pass the user. This will save this data in database. Okay, and also return the user. In fact, I will return the user which we are storing in database, not what we got. Okay, so I'm returning the user here. And also I'm going to user controller. Okay, we need service here. So @auto-wired private user service, user, okay, I will say service. And here I'm going to basically say return service dot register user. So we got the request on the controller sending to service sending to database, and we are done. Again, till this point, we have not talked about Bcrypt. We are just storing the user in the database as it is. Okay, so by doing this, let's restart the application and see what can go wrong. Okay, server started. I will use my postman. Okay, and let's send get student. Let's see if this is working first. And yeah, so this is working. Authorization is this. Now I want to create a new user, right? So I will say post and I will send the request for register, but we have to pass the body as well, right? Now in the body, of course, I don't want to pass the product. What I want to pass is the ID. I want to pass the username. Now from where you will get this field, now this is depend upon what you have used here. So this is the type of users. And if you go to users, these are the three fields you have to pass: ID, username, and password. So let's get back ID, username, and password. The value is 3 here because we already have 1 and 2. The username I want to go for this time is, let's say, okay, what user we don't have. Let's verify from database. We got Naveen and Sushil. Let's go for Harsh. And the password is h@123. Okay, so let's click on send. It should work. You can see we got the user back from the database. And the best way to verify is actually hitting database, right? So I will just run this. And yeah, we got new user. Again, no Bcrypt implemented. Now let's implement Bcrypt. What I want to do is I want to create this new user, but then the data which you are storing in database should be with a new, with a Bcrypt. So what we can do is here, before you send the user to database in the service layer, what you can do is you can change the password. So you can say user.set password. But how will I know what is the Bcrypt version of that password? Maybe you can just get the password here, go to that website, copy that. What I'm talking about is take the password, type it here, copy this, and paste it there. Again, we don't want to do manual process. So in that case, we have to use a library, the Bcrypt library. And the good thing is, in Spring Security, you will get Bcrypt by default. You just have to use the object. So I will just create the object here. There are two ways of creating the object. You can use the bean in the security config file or in the configuration, or I can just hard code the value, or I can just create the object by myself. So I will say Bcrypt password encoder, and you can see this is a part of Spring Security. So Spring Framework.security. So we are happy. At least we are not using some third party which will give you some errors. So we got encoder, and we can say new Bcrypt password encoder. Now in this bracket, basically for the constructor of Bcrypt password encoder, we can pass this strength. What is this strength? The rounds, 10 rounds, 12 rounds. By default it will be 10 if I'm not wrong. They don't have the documentation. Let's download the source. Let's see. So strength is by default. Okay, they don't have a default strength, is it? Okay, by default is -1. Is weird. If you pass something, okay, they've not mentioned the strength. So log rounds to use between 4 to 31. So we can use between these numbers. Next, we can also mention the version. So with the strength, you can also mention the number, version, like we can have 2A, 2B, 2Y. We'll stick to the basic version, whatever it passes. Let's go back to the user, and here I will just mention 12. We are not going for 10 now, we are going for 12. Strength is 12. So using this encoder, I can simply say set password, encoder.encode, that's the method, and pass the password. But how will I know the password? Actually, we know. In the user object, we're already getting the password, right? So get the password, encode it, set it in the user, set it to the user, and it will do your work. Okay, so I am hoping this will work. Let's try. So let's restart the application. Now go back to register. Of course, I will use the same username password for the authorization. In the body, I will create a new user now. So I will say for, this time it is Avni and A@123. Let's see if this works. Send. It worked. We got 200 OK. And we also got a password. Can you see that? We got a Bcrypt password. We can also verify that in the database. So let's head back to database. Let's hit the query. And this is your new password. But we got another big problem now. Let's try to do something. So let's say I want to fetch all the students. I'm just trying to access some resource. And in the authorization, Naveen will work. So if I say run, it works. But let's say I'm trying to use a new user, which is Avni A@123. If I click on send, we got authorization fail. Why? This is the right password. It's just that when you are storing when you are creating a new user, you are converting into Bcrypt, right? The hash. But when you're validating it, we are not doing that. Because in the validation, if you go back to your security config, this file, we have written one line here, which is this line. Can you see that? We are saying that when you are verifying it, still use no op password encoder. That means we are using a default one, not the Bcrypt. So yeah, for storing we are using it, but for verifying we are not using it. So how do I verify? So we have to convert this. Of course, if I want, I can go to database and copy this string. I'm just hoping this will work. Never tried it. Yeah, it works in that way. But do you think user will enter this? Of course, they want to enter their normal passwords. You can't expect them to remember the hash values. And again, it's not safe to transfer this on the internet. So what can we do? Of course, while verifying it, instead of using no op password, use Bcrypt. How difficult that can be? Maybe creating some classes and objects? No, just one line. What you can do is just create the new object of Bcrypt password encoder and pass this strength. That's it. You just mentioned that we are saying that, hey, authentication provider, the password encoder you have to use is Bcrypt and the strength is 12. That's it. Now it knows, okay, whatever password I will receive, I will convert that into Bcrypt hash, and now I will verify it. And by doing so, let's run this and let's see if this works. So go back to the postman. Let's use the hash, and hash will not work now. Yeah, you can see we got 401. But now let's use a normal password. It's A@123. Send. It worked. What about the normal users? Naveen, normal users means the user with the plain text. Even for them, it will not work. In that case, you have to basically ask them to update their passwords. Maybe, sometimes you receive a link from some applications or some service by saying, hey, it's time to change your password. Maybe, they mess up sometimes and they ask you to change the password. I doubt. Anyway, so one thing you can do is, if you want to change the new password, if you want this to work, you can create a Bcrypt version of this and copy this. Again, not a good idea. I'm just showing you what you can do. And here, you can just update Naveen. So you can say, first of all, ID of Naveen is what? It's 1. So I will say update users, set the password. I don't know why I'm feeling that I'm doing a crime here, where the ID is equal to 3. Oh, sorry, ID is equal to 1. Just hit this query, run, got updated, and run. So you can see for Naveen also, we got the encrypted password or the hashing password. And now I can verify this and this should work. So make sure that all your passwords are encrypted, and who is not safe? It's Sushil and Harsh. Okay, it's time to send them a link by saying update your passwords. So anyway, we have talked about Bcrypt, and now we know why encoding your password is important and how do we do that. So we can use Bcrypt. It's not the only solution. We have other solutions as well. And if you tried something, let me know in the comments, and others will also try. So that's it from this video. I hope you enjoyed how do we use Bcrypt, how do we do hashing, and I hope you are enjoying whatever we are doing now. There are some other topics which is coming up, and maybe we'll do that after a small break. Let's see how the time goes. So yeah, officially we have done with the part of Spring Security, where you can use a username, we can use a password, and things are working out. There's another way, which is JWT, which we'll see later. But even if you're securing your application, this solution works. JWT is a different ball game altogether. So that's it from this video. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.